Welcome to Libeth. I'm glad you're here. This week we are in 17th century Japan with the Book of Five Rings, the Go-Rin no Sho of Miyamoto Musashi. Today we open with why this book still matters, nowadays, right now for you. Musashi wrote this book in a cave. He was 60 years old. He had fought more than 60 duels without losing a single one, and he had spent the previous decades wandering Japan, not teaching, not building an institution, not accumulating students or patrons, simply practicing, observing, testing his understanding against opponents who were trying to kill him. He wrote the Book of Five Rings in 1645, 2 years before his death, not to establish a school or protect a legacy, but because he had arrived at something he believed was true, and he wanted to write it down before he died. What he believed was true is not complicated to state, though it takes a lifetime to understand. Strategy is a skill. Not a talent, not a gift, not an inheritance. A skill, like carpentry or medicine, that can be learned by anyone willing to put in the work and think clearly. And strategy, understood correctly, is not a specialized technique for warfare. It is a universal capacity for navigating any situation where opposition, uncertainty, and the requirement to act decisively are present. Which means almost every situation that matters. Musashi insists on that universality from the first lines of the Groundbook by showing the company strategy keeps. Alongside the way of Buddha and the way of Confucius, there are ways for doctors and poets, for tea and archery, for farmers and merchants. He says the warrior's way is twofold, pen and sword, and that even a man without natural ability can become a warrior by sticking assiduously to both divisions. He does not mean a literal household of swordsmen everywhere. He intends a habit of mind that crosses domains. Here the carpenter he keeps returning to. A foreman does not only swing an axe, he plans the building, chooses the right timber for the visible pillars and the hidden scaffolding, assigns tasks to men of differing skill, watches morale, and adjusts the work as conditions change. That is strategy in miniature. If the foreman misreads the grain of a beam, the whole house fails. If the commander misreads the character of his men and the terrain, the campaign fails. From one thing, Musashi insists, no 10,000 things. Master a concrete craft in your body and the same logic will teach you to see structures in politics, business, or design, because the underlying requirements are the same. Read the situation, assign resources, and act at the right moment. The claim is bold, and it rests on a concrete image rather than a slogan, which is why it travels. But treating it as a slogan rather than a method is the common error. And Musashi warns us against people whose way becomes a marketable ornament rather than a transforming practice. The second theme is adaptability over rigid systems, and Musashi makes this insistently physical in the Water Book. You can hear his metaphor everywhere. Water has no fixed form. It takes the shape of its receptacle, sometimes a trickle, sometimes a wild sea. Water is not passive. It cuts through stone not by sudden force, but by persistent finding of the path of least resistance. Musashi's strategist must be like that water, uncommitted to a single posture, able to be trickle or torrent according to what the moment demands. He spends pages dismantling the prestige of fixed attitudes, of schools that teach a catalog of postures and call that mastery. The teaching, attitude no attitude, is crucial. There are 5 practical attitudes for the long sword, upper, middle, lower, left, and right. But the point is never the pose itself. The point is to be able to move from any attitude to any other freely, to let form follow circumstance rather than forcing circumstance into form. He turns this into a moral as well as a technique. Other schools, he says, have become arts for sale, coloring and showing off technique, hurrying the bloom of the flower, and they become brittle. They teach students to produce an image of expertise, not the capacity to respond when the room is dark, the path muddy, the enemy unexpected. Musashi's remedy is bodily. Do not merely read or imitate. Teach your body strategy is the aphorism. He gives specific counterimages. The Chinese monkey's body, which means do not stretch your arms, get in close, move your whole body as a single instrument. Glue and lacquer emulsion body, which means stick to the enemy so there is not the slightest gap. Those are tactical directions, but they are also ways of thinking about adaptation. Close when the situation demands closeness, withdraw when it demands distance, and never be married to the movement that succeeded yesterday. This argument matters now because many modern systems reward narrow expertise and polished technique. Musashi asks instead for principle-made habit, a readiness to become whatever form is necessary as circumstances change. The third theme is timing and positioning, and here Musashi turns almost poetic and very precise at once. Timing, he tells us in the ground book, is everywhere in music, in the rise and fall of merchants' fortunes, in the life of a warrior, and strategy depends on discerning both distance timing and background timing. Then in the fire book, he gives us the vocabulary for doing that work in a fight. Ken no sen, taking the initiative by attacking. Tai no sen, forestalling by acting as the attack is launched. And Tai Tai no sen, meeting the attack and carrying it through. These three ways are not abstract tricks. Imagine a courtyard in which the sun is at your back, because he told you to always, if possible, stand with the sun behind you. Imagine you have forced your opponent toward a threshold where the stony footing makes his usual footwork worthless. Ken no sen becomes an early, overwhelming dash that unmans him. Tai no sen is the small feint that collapses his timing the instant he commits. Tai Tai no sen is the composure of matching his stroke and turning his momentum against him. Musashi makes timing tactical. Hold down a pillow means suppress his head at the syllable where he would rise. Tread down the sword is the idea of putting your whole body into stopping his second attempt. These are not metaphors only. He describes the feel of them. The flowing water cut used when blades are stuck together, the fire and stones cut when you strike without raising the sword, the timing of the abdomen timing of two, when you feint and hit as he relaxes. All of these ideas push the central claim. Rhythm beats power. A man who perceives the rhythm and knows when it's about to break wins more consistently than a stronger man who cannot hear that break. Positioning is inseparable from timing. Musashi is meticulous about where you place yourself. Higher ground, the kamaza in a house, the sun at your back, open space on your left so you can move. And he insists you use the terrain the way a foreman uses timber. If you chase an opponent into thresholds and pillars, you have made his world small. If you let him turn and look around, you have given him a second to recover. The Fire Book teaches that managing space is part of the same attention that manages tempo. Push him to awkward places, deny him sightlines, force him to act out of rhythm, then finish him in the crest of his collapse. Timing and position are a continuous duet. To practice one without the other is to learn music without listening to the room. The fourth theme is minimalism in action, which Musashi insists upon again and again in a way that should unsettle our appetite for spectacle. The popular image of the samurai is dramatic, large swinging gestures, theatrical postures. Musashi repeatedly condemns that preference for the flower, the decorative movement that announces itself, the technique chosen for appearance rather than effectiveness. He differentiates cutting from slashing. Cutting is decisive, slashing is merely touch. The ideal is the one cut, the movement carried through to its end, deployed without waste. He also gives us a paradoxical prescription. Sometimes the body becomes the sword. If the opponent guards in such a way that a cut will not land, charge with the body, and use the sword after you have disrupted his balance. That is economy, not timidity, but exact calibration. He connects this to the carpenter again. A foreman doesn't use the biggest tool, he uses the right tool. A strategist who brings everything to every fight is like a carpenter who uses a sledgehammer to pair a joint. Musashi's repeated admonition that men make a livelihood by coloring and showing off their technique is his cultural diagnosis of the spectacle habit. The remedy is the discipline of the minimum effective action. Practice until the smallest movement becomes decisive, until timing and placement allow you to end an exchange with less motion and less energy. He calls this the no design, no conception cut in the water book, hitting from the void, without a prior schematic in the mind that telegraphs the move. And that is the purest form of minimalism, because it removes the theatrical prep that betrays intent. Musashi's book carries both the appeal of utility and the risk of facile appropriation. The appeal is clear. He describes a real anatomy of skill in competitive, uncertain situations, confirmed by other traditions from chess to improvisation. The risk is also clear. You can read a few aphorisms and retrofit them onto whatever you already believe, making Musashi into a confirmation of your instincts rather than a corrective. He knew this danger. He watches other schools become mere technique and warns against the easy vanity of spectacle. So if we treat the Book of Five Rings as an engine for disciplined, embodied thinking about decision, timing, and economy, if we learn what Musashi meant by teach your body strategy, and from one thing know 10,000 things, then the book genuinely repays close study because it gives both practical tools and a quiet ethic for how to practice them without turning them into ornament. This week, then, we will keep his own structure. Ground to set the plan and the carpenter's logic. Water to cultivate a mind that becomes the situation's shape. Fire to train the sense of rhythm and place. Wind to understand the failure modes of other systems. And void to point toward the state from which genuine, unforced strategy issues. We will practice his metaphors as muscles. Take the foreman's choice of timber and run it through a workplace decision. Take the flowing water cut and imagine it as a conversation where the moment of attention is what wins. Take holding down a pillow and hear how one syllable of timing can change an outcome. We will aim to do what Musashi asked, not to make a manual of easy maxims, but to allow the book's concrete rules and counterimages to live in the body, so that when a real situation arises, the right form comes without thought. That's all for today on Libeth. Tomorrow we step into the world where the Book of Five Rings was born, 17th century Japan, a swordsman who spent his life in single combat, and a text written in the last 2 years of an extraordinary life. If you want to follow the whole journey, subscribe, a new book every week. At least we try.